He's now wanting to go and study and practice law. So we're very excited for him and the choices that he's making. We're very proud of both of the kids, and they've done very well. As was mentioned, I'm a proud alum of Tuskegee University, and I had the great privilege to deliver the commencement address at the last spring commencement, which was a lifelong sort of bucket list item. Somehow, you know, God just smiled on me and just let that happen. So it was a great privilege to do that, and just to experience the love of the university and to share what I've learned over all these many years since my graduation from Tuskegee back with the student body and the class that was graduating. It was just a tremendous experience. Karen spoke that weekend, and I had an opportunity to hear her speak as well. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience of what, you know, life going sort of full circle is all about. There's some other things that I'll kind of tap into at the end, probably in the form of answering questions, other things about, you know, myself and who I am. But just wanted to give you a sense of that in terms of who's talking to you. Okay? So, on to that slide. Again, as I said, I was going to work my way. I made some notes, so I just kind of stay on task here. Based on the way this room is set up, that might not be that easy to read. I'm going to work here starting in this sort of northwest quadrant here and just kind of work my way around this thing. So the first thing I thought about is we kind of need to get on the same page with what we're talking about. And the brief for me was, let's talk about how to move from surviving to thriving in today's environment. And is it possible for us to do that in the form of maybe sharing some insights and then having an open dialogue, a discussion about what's on your minds and on your hearts with respect to this topic? So that's kind of what we're going to attempt to do. Is that fair? Is everybody cool with that? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to share these thoughts. The first thing I thought about is, it might be good to define what does it mean when we say move from surviving to thriving. So the first thing is, what is surviving? What does that mean in the context of what we're talking about? And in my view, surviving means a state of existence where vital activity meets the basic requirements for sustenance, or meets the requirements for basic sustenance. That's surviving. If you just think about that, if we didn't have this meeting and somebody asked you what surviving was, you probably would come up with a set of words that would describe this same sort of condition, right? It's a condition that, frankly, most of us will have experienced at some point in life when we are surviving. It may have happened to you when you were a kid and you got thrown into the swimming pool and you didn't quite yet know how to swim. Anybody been there? Right? You know, it may have been some other situation that you were in. It Maybe you were a Boy Scout and you were out in the wilderness and they all left you. Right? It could be anything, right? Where you felt that you were in a state of existence where there was a set of vital activities that your body does, right? That you weren't really doing much beyond those vital activities. You were just doing what it took to sustain life. That's surviving. And I would submit to you that there are many people, not a few, many people in our culture, inside P&G, who are trying to operate at the level of surviving. Surviving. They think in terms of, well, if I can make it 5 more years, you know, I'll be able to leave. That's surviving. Right? What is it going to take for me to keep the boss off my back? You know, I don't want to get a call. I don't want to get all these calls from management. What do I have to do to operate at a level just enough where I don't get the call? That's surviving. And if you think about it, when you're in that mode, there are some things that happen to you. One thing that happens is the requirements can be reduced when you're already in a surviving mode, and what the survivor does is reduces output. So let me just put it in the plain way of thinking about it. If you were out in a wilderness and then all of a sudden the temperatures dropped and it got freezing cold, what would your body do? Yeah, absolutely. It's going to say, hey, wait a minute. We only got so much heat that we can produce, right? We're not going to send it all the way out here. We're going to take care of these vital organs. We're going to try to take care of the brain. We're going to try to take care of the heart and all the vital organs. And we're going to lower output. Why? Because we got to conserve output. So this is actually what we do in the real situation when we're out here working. When you get into survival mode, you actually do that. You actually produce less. And so surviving that state of existence is something that is very dangerous. You can tell by the way we're talking about it. It's a dangerous state of existence. But I will submit to you, there's some in this room who are surviving. You're in survival mode. Surviving. Now, let's talk about thriving. If that's surviving, what is thriving? Thriving is a state of existence where productive activity far exceeds the requirements for success. Productive activity far exceeds the requirements for success. Now think about the difference. In the surviving, you're thinking, what's the bare minimum I need to do to keep management off my back? In thriving, this thought doesn't even occur to you. You're way beyond the expectations that anyone can set for you. Your productive capacity is trained on something that is beyond maybe even what you know how to currently do. You're thinking on things and working on things that you have not yet solved. Your ideas are bigger. They're more expansive. And if you think about it, I mean, this is the normal situation of someone or anything, whether it's a plant or a person or an animal in the wild or whatever. When they're thriving, they function this way. And in this situation, if requirements are increased, then a thriving person redirects their capacity to match the new expectation. Think about the difference now. In the survivor, if the requirements are decreased or reduced, they reduce output. When you're thriving, you're functioning at max output. So it's not a matter of, I got to step up and do more. It's a matter of, I got to redirect all this energy somewhere else. Whole different mindset. I already got more energy than I can actually apply to the work. Right? So now somebody's asking me to do a little bit more. I just redirect my energy. Two totally different mindsets. Now, of course, I want to focus on thriving and not focus on surviving. Right? I think that's the brief. But in order to understand thriving, we have to understand the value represented by its opposite. It's just like understanding light. You can't understand light if you don't understand darkness. Darkness is required in order to understand light. That's why, in the biblical account, darkness precedes light. Right? The Bible first teaches us that we were in the darkness. Then God threw the light down in the darkness. Right? So there is a need to understand the opposite of what we want to do. So we understand, therefore we now can set up where we're going. Because if ultimately we want to be at thriving, we can understand the opposite of that as surviving. And now we've set up point A and point B. Everybody with me?
Yes.
It's a group of engineers now, so I know I ain't lost y'all. Right? But I just want us to, I really want us to sort of think on that, because it's all descriptive of a personal mindset, a way of thinking about oneself that helps us to approach the environment with a different viewpoint, a different vantage point. And when we do that, a lot of other things happen as a result of us doing that. So we show up surviving, Sort of the universe sort of conforms to the fact that we're just survivors. But if we show up thriving, same thing happens. First quadrant's done. We've taken a look at that. So, if that's all true, then what are the indicators of someone who is thriving? What are the indicators? How do we know somebody is thriving? Well, typically we can see how their efforts are translating into consistent progress. Let me say that again. Typically when somebody is thriving, we can see their efforts consistently translating into progress. Not a one and done, not a lucky one-off, not a happenstance, they just fell into some success. The people who are thriving are just keep being successful. It just keeps happening for them. Consistent progress. We all know, and in an audience like this, I don't have to tell you that done luck usually doesn't translate into consistent progress. You can't just get lucky and it keep happening for you. Right? So what happens is we come to realize that the progress is the result of deliberate activity. We were talking at this table about process orientation and how the point of process orientation is to be able to predict the outcome, to be able to repeat what you did so that it's not happening by happenstance. It's happening because you know if you do this, in this order, you get this outcome. Right? So consistent progress is one of the indicators. Another indicator is that we observe people have a positive perspective. Think about anybody that you know that you would consider thriving. They got a positive perspective. They tend to look at the glass half full, not half empty. Even though they are capable of considering half empty, they tend to start from half full. They see the upside of things. They see how things can be. They see a future that's brighter than the present. They even view today as brighter than the past. These are the people who are thriving. It's a mindset, it's an orientation, it's a way of approaching your existence in the environment. So you have consistent progress that leads to positive perspective, and then that all leads to a persistent passion in their demeanor. Somebody mentioned, and Rhea said in introducing me, when I see this guy, he kind of fills up the room with a sort of a presence of some sort here, right? Well, that's not by happenstance. That's by design. If I just show up in the room and just go over here and sit in the corner and whatnot, then, who's going to know I was ever there? Right? I show up by design, exemplifying an equity which I have very carefully built and managed over time. I remember when I was a kid, before I ever even went to college, my mother used to say, now, one thing I want you to realize is that when you go to work, you see how forward thinking my mother was. I hadn't even gone to college. She was talking about work. Keep your eye on the prize, son. Right? She said, if you want to lead, if you want to be a president, a vice president, show up looking like one. People ask me, how come you wear suits? Don't nobody wear no suits no more. I said, well, I ain't nobody. I'm somebody. I am somebody. I'm somebody. Right? Amen. And so, I had an opportunity to give a speech in St. Louis a few months ago, and I was talking about this. And I was talking about how important it is to very carefully craft your own personal equity. Who is it that you are trying to represent? You're the only person who can do that. Right? And one of the things that people know about me is that not only do I wear a suit, but most often I wear a waistcoat, what you call a vest, right? But the point of this is, I carefully selected that as part of the equity that I wanted to present. Doesn't mean that's right for you. You may never want to do that. But be careful and selective about whatever equity you are presenting. Because whether or not you're thinking about it, people are in fact taking notice of it. So what you see is a virtuous cycle that can develop in the mindset and in the practical extension of that mindset with the person who is thriving. And that's what this little circular diagram here is talking about. Progress, which leads to personal passion, which leads to positive perspective. It makes sense. If you're making progress, you're going to be passionate, even more passionate than you were, right? That passion is going to then shape your perspective. You're going to show up as positive versus showing up as negative, right? You just show up that way. It doesn't mean that you don't see problems or you think in an airy-fairy way, oh, you know, let's all sing Kumbaya, the world's wonderful. You know, I mean, it just means that your approach, the angle, right, the perspective, the vantage point that you have, right, the way you're coming at it is positive, regardless. This set of indicators is timeless. I mean, if you just think about the people that, whoever you would say is thriving, just think about them, in just like in practical terms. These would be the things that you would see in them. Now, I'm going to ask you about this. I don't want you to raise your hand. But I want to ask you about each of these. Do you see yourself as making that consistent progress today? Or is your reality one of fits and starts? Doing well for a time, then you fall off. You're doing well for a time, and you fall off. Or, boy, I can't remember the last time I was really doing well. I'm doing okay. Nobody's bothering me. But like really throwing down, I don't remember the last time I was there. You know, how do you see yourself? What's your passion? Is your passion high or low? Is your passion situational? Do you only have high passion when things are going well? Do you only have high passion when there's no problem to solve? Do you only have high passion when people like you? When you got a good boss, a supportive work environment, a team that loves you. Can't wait for you to get to work. They call you, why are you late? Wait. Girl, where you at? No, we can't do nothing without you here. Now, do you bring that positive perspective, right? The winning perspective. You know, these are the kinds of things, they're so simple, but yet you can see them in yourself, and maybe for some of us it's episodic. We see it at times, but we don't see it at other times. You know, or you can see it in other people. So you know it when you see it. Amen? Amen. Yeah, we know it when we see it. So that's kind of the thing that I want us to kind of just put in our mindset, put in our frame. Okay, now I can probably evaluate my behavior over the course of this week. You know, how was I on Monday, Tuesday, now it's hump day, right? How was I against these three things? And therefore, do I need to do something different on Thursday? Actually, the rest of Wednesday. To be quiet. Ain't no sense of waiting till Thursday. We can start practicing this right now. I might ask y'all to get up and strut. Let me see, you know, what kind of persona you showing. The thing I want you to take away from this sort of this cycle. First of all, obviously, any virtuous cycle has a countervailing vicious cycle if you go the wrong way or you have the wrong attributes in these examples, right? That's the vicious cycle where you actually still keep repeating the thing, but the thing is hurting you or it's hurting the environment, right? This is the virtuous one. That's all good. you to take this away as well. Thriving is largely an internal choice. In other words, it's a choice within yourself. You have to determine that you will thrive. You have to determine that. And that sounds easy, but trust me, that's not as easy as it sounds when you're just simply saying it, making a statement. That's some work. If you want to be real with yourself, do you really want to do that? I remember when I was a band 2 manager. Yeah, I was a band 2 manager, but I was clearly staged for band 3. You know, it was in a group of people. Everybody knew these people were going to make the band 3. Back then, we called it unit manager on special assignment. Unit manager is band 2. Unit manager on special assignment is just waiting on that role, that band 3 role that's going to open up. So I remember I was there. We had just formed a group called the Sales Black Leadership Team. This is in the 1980s, late 80s. And we were talking to the company about issues related to diversity, progress, advancement, etc. And it occurred to some of us that the conversation had some gaps. I mean, you know, that's typical, right? It happens all the time. But when we boiled it down, we realized that the gaps were actually very specific. The company did not know what the individual members of that group wanted to do at their end game. In other words, the company had no idea what I wanted to be doing when I retired, right? And I had no idea what that looked like, that particular role that I aspired to for retirement. I didn't really know what it looked like. Because there was nobody that looked like me that was doing that kind of work. So we did an intervention, and basically we asked for, and at that time there were no black VPs. There was only one black VP in the entire company. Which, if you can imagine that, right, in our lifetime. Right? There's only one black VP in P&G. His name is H. Ross Love. Right? And so we did an intervention because there were people who aspired to be VPs. And we brought in a VP who, of course, by definition had to be white. There was no black VPs. And we brought this individual in to tell us what is it like to be a vice president at Procter & Gamble, so that we could put reality into this aspiration. And when we did that, it was a very, very transparent, very open conversation. It happens that the person who we invited in to have that conversation's name is David Taylor. Just happens that he was the guy that we brought in. And he explained to us his life as a vice president. It was powerful because there were a number of people who realized through that conversation that they had no intent to ever be a VP in Procter & Gamble. Because they realized what that meant, what the company expects of you if you are functioning at that level in the company. The company, and any company, as you get increased responsibility, wants more of you, not less. More of your mental capacity, more of your physical capacity, and more of you in total. Your time. So when he described what he was doing on the weekend, when he described how he was having to carry out his responsibilities, the majority of the members of the Sales Black Leadership Team decided they did not want to ever be VPs. That was powerful. Because all of us thought everybody wanted to, go run the company one day. It was very powerful. And what happened in that process, that people got in touch with themselves in a deeper way than just kind of running around saying, how come you ain't promoted us to VP or whatever. They got in touch with that in a real way. And at the same time, we did something else to solve the other problem, which was the company had no idea where the people wanted to be at the end game. And so we collected that information. We shared it transparently among ourselves. So we knew what everybody in the group's aspiration was. We shared that very openly. It was kept confidential, but we shared that very openly. It took the group to another level. So I share that with you because I want you to realize that in order to thrive, you're going to have to invest something. You're going to have to give up something. You're going to have to think a little bit differently. You're going to have to go beneath the surface in order to actually do this. It's one thing for me to explain the theory to you, but I'm telling you that in order to do it, to get there, you're actually going to have to give up something. It's going to cost you to get there. You can't just be good at your job. And it's just going to happen. So you need to, you need to think about whether or not you want to give those things in return for the expectation. Does that make sense? Everybody still with me? Yeah. Thriving. The other thing I want you to take away from this is that not only is it an internal choice, but it is a combination of two different types of perspective: the personal perspective and the organizational perspective. The personal perspective is what I was talking about in terms of us getting real with ourselves and realizing what we want. But the organization also has a perspective. And the organization is your leadership and so on and so forth up through whatever function or department or division or whatever that you're in, right? That's the organization. The organization always has a perspective of you. What you need to be looking at is, does that match my perspective of myself? We always have a lot of people who see themselves as more than what the organization sees them. Complete disconnect. No connection between the two. And they're frustrated. And they drop down into survival mode because they see the disconnect. So again, you have to give something to get there. Okay? All right. Doing good. Move on to, actually I'm going to move on to this other one that looks like a chart. Little line chart there. And I want to talk about this continuum. So basically a continuum, but it's obviously laid out as an exponential curve for a reason. This is, think of this as the 30 or 31 days in a month. Right? You can't see it, but there's 31 points on this curve, representing the days of the month. Right? And if you look at the curve without seeing the values, you can tell, right, that on the left side of that red line that's going up the middle, on the left side of that, there is not much activity. Right? Not much change. And on the right-hand side, there's a lot of activity. Significant change, hence the exponential curve. And I want to submit to you that there are a number of vectors that we have to consider every day that help us place ourselves on that curve on that day. On that day. So some days you might come to work and you're operating around, 1 through 15. By the way, the red line is at the center point. It's at the midpoint of the curve. Right? So you can come in on a lot of different days thinking you're really doing something different, but really it ain't amounting to much. Right? You're still on the left-hand side. But as far as you're concerned, man, I'm doing that altogether different than what I was doing yesterday. Right? And that, I will submit to you, is the reality of the survivor. The survivor is coming to work thinking that they're doing something different, thinking that they changed something, they discovered something, they're sharing something, they're solving something, whatever they're doing, and it doesn't amount to much. Now, if they come every day and they operate on that left-hand side of that curve, the question is, will anyone know that they were even here this month? And the deeper question is, Would anyone care? Now, in an environment that like the one that we're in now, which is an environment emphasizing productivity, not emphasizing growth. We talk about growth, but we're not emphasizing growth. We're emphasizing productivity. So add up all the words, and look at how many words we talk about productivity, and look at how many words we talk about growth, and you see what we emphasize. And it'll require no rocket science to get it. In an environment that is emphasizing productivity, if you're showing up every day on the left-hand side of the curve, your chances of being here in the long haul are low. Because nobody really knows you're here, because you have no impact. And the longer you continue to operate with no impact, people stop caring. Not here to call anybody out, but you know where you are. You're trying to operate over here, your time with us is short. So again, you have to put something in if you want to get something out. Make sense?
Yeah.
Now, I want to take that and double click a little bit deeper, right? Just a little double click on it. And if you look at the curve is describing, I talked about the x-axis, we're just talking about time. But what is the y-axis? The y-axis is what I call the AVA concentration. The AVA concentration. In other words, what is the proportion of A, V, and A that you have in your actual daily routine at work? Okay? What's the concentration? How big is A, V, and A? How much did you bring? Make sense? Now, if you're bringing very little and it doesn't change much, then you're over here. It's constantly bringing very little. And again, remember, the survivor keeps bringing less. It's by definition. It's the nature of surviving. You just keep bringing less. Because the body is saying the conditions are not favorable. I got to conserve energy. I'll feed the vital organs and nothing more. Eventually, it'll start picking among the vital organs. Because if it doesn't put anything out, it's not going to be able to produce anymore. It's a cycle, right? So the AVA, what is that? That's the final quadrant. So AVA, A is ability, first A. The V is visibility. And the second A is agility. Ability, visibility, and agility. Now, why do you talk about those, Witherspoon? Glad you asked. I want to talk about those because they relate to both the survivor and the thriver. And how so? Well, that's what this little chart is talking about. With respect to ability, when you are surviving, what you're doing is coping with other people around you. You're coping. You learn how to cope. You know, somebody comes in and tells you something, and you go, I don't like that. How do I cope with it? How do I kind of make